Th this will be on Wellbeing in Academia, and Professor Dilshani Dasanyake will be your chair, who will introduce herself in a second. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through some housekeeping of the webinar, just so that it runs smoothly. We are recording the session, and with your participation, you indicate consent for the recording. This is just so that we can send the recording after the webinar for everyone to access, in case they want to watch it back or if they weren't able to attend. There are closed captions available. I will make this known in the chat again. There is a little CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window that you can click on, where you have live captions, and also the option to have a live transcript on a side panel to follow. If you have any technical issues, please do let us know either in the chat or in an email to this email address, which is mine, and I will do my very best to help you. To reduce background noise, we're going to mute everyone except for the speaker. This is just because we have a very large number of participants, and we don't want anyone to miss out on the talks. If you have any questions during the Q&A session, just use the raise your hand function in Zoom, or you can also just directly ask a question in the chat, which we will then pick up. That is all for me, and I'll hand over to Dilshani now to introduce herself and the speakers.
Thank you very much, Sabita. And thank you, Andy, also who's behind the scene, organizing this webinar. I'm Dilshani Dissanayake from the Faculty of Medicine, Colombo. You can see the faculty from behind. Ayubowan to all of you. This is the Sinhalese greeting that we have in Sri Lanka, which means long life, from wish, saying may you live longer. This is a wish that we want to share with all of you in the world. This pandemic actually has taught us the importance of life, as well as highlighted its impermanence. We do not just want to live longer. We need to live a productive life. We need to become someone special, become someone, and leave our footprints behind. So while we try to achieve all these goals, sometimes we may forget our well-being, especially when you're in academia. So at OTA, we decided to have a chat with you, have a discussion with you as to how to stay well and safe in academia and also stay healthy. So for that, we have invited two experts to share their knowledge and experience. First, we have Dr. Joyce Wangari, who is joining us from Kenya. Wangari is a consultant psychologist and a research mentor. She has been doing that for the last 15 years. She's a researcher, storyteller, who enjoys mixed method approaches to eliminate societal issues under psychology, deaf and disability studies. And also she's interested in research ethics. She just completed a PhD titled Relationship Between Psychosocial Support Concerns and Depression Among Deaf Adults, a mixed study in Nairobi and Kajiado counties in Kenya. She did the study at the United States International University, Africa. She earned a global award at the American Psychological Association Convention in 2018 in California for a study titled Barriers to Mental Health Access for Deaf Adults in Kenya. She's a TED Talk 2020 laureate on humor for resilience. Now today, Wangari will define well-being for us and also will talk on well-being in academia amongst East Africa early career researchers. Over to you, Dr. Wangari.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I believe you can hear me well.
Yes.
All right, thank you. I'll need to get that greeting from Sri Lanka. So please type it in the chat. I love learning about new cultures and I'm so glad to be here today. So aside from my role being a research steward and an author aide, I'm also a co-facilitator of the author aide social science group. And I can see some members of the social science journal club and the author aide who have joined us today. Thank you so much for doing so. I am a social scientist, a psychologist, as you've heard, and I'm going to be sharing my slides shortly, but I just want to tell you the context of, oh, there you go, Ayubo 1. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Long life to you too, Dilshani. Thank you.
Correct pronunciation. Well done.
Oh, okay, good. I learned a new word today. So happy. And recently, I also just completed my doctorate. I'm still learning, you know, to put my title in front of my name. So I'm happy to share that celebration with you. So I'm going to be talking about the context of well-being in academia for early career researchers in East Africa. So let me share my slides. I hope you can see them. I'm gonna put full screen.
We can see them.
Okay, good, thank you. So this picture is of early career researchers, maybe perhaps, who have well-being. And, you know, in this case, well-being is happiness, prosperity, you know, health, which includes mental health. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So I'd like to define what well-being is, as well as mental health. I think the two go together. And then I'll talk about the context of East Africa in academia and a specific program that I ran with an organization called AIDA Africa, Journal Club Program, on how we boost well-being and mental health for early career researchers in East African context. And then finally, I will also discuss some of the challenges of putting well-being into action, both individually and collectively. In my talk, I really want you to think about, you know, individual factors as well as systemic factors as we proceed. So as you can see on the screen, mental health is a continuum, and people can have a high sense of subjective well-being whether or not they are suffering from a specific mental illness. For instance, if I have a diagnosis of, say, a clinical condition like bipolar, whereby my mood may fluctuate from high or mania to low or depression, if I'm under good medication and I'm taking care of myself, I can still experience optimum mental health. So mental health, as we know from the World Health Organization, is the ideal state of functioning, you know, where a person is able to contribute to society. And as you can see from the next diagram, stigma is an overriding factor across the continuum. So at the top there you have well-being and fitness. At the bottom you have minimum mental health or well-being or fitness. And stigma is one of the challenges or barriers which has to do with shame or, you know, hiding out, especially when inside of academia, you are struggling with, say, you know, any condition, whether diagnosable or not. It could be a symptom or, you know, a full diagnosis. So I'll be talking about stigma a little bit later. So in the context of East Africa, AIDA Africa Journal Club program has had a number of programs. I'll highlight one of them. The Study Smart program was a pilot for a full year, whereby we actually ran a holistic well-being and mental health program for early career researchers from July 2019 to June 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic was declared in Kenya in March 2020. So it was just before the COVID outbreak. And at the time when we started, we actually used to have physical meetings. And so we would have monthly meetings, very similar to what you can see on the picture on the right. This is an example of mental health access in low resource countries such as Kenya, but this one is actually in Zimbabwe. You've heard about the friendship bench. So a way of reaching and listening to what students are going through during their academic journey and research journey. So it was a highly successful program which combined Zoom meetings. I got a couple of colleagues and myself to do 40 minutes or 1 hour Zooms once a month. So that was the online part. And then we had a physical session, which doubled up as group therapy. We did not have a strict agenda and we did not restrict the numbers. And so we found that a lot of students, and the context of AIDA Africa, of course, is that we run journal club programs of students all across Kenya and now beyond, but primarily focused on Kenya, and our programmings follow the East Africa timing. And so we found that a lot of students were isolated and struggling with their challenges in academia, which are both individual and systemic. And so one of the things, the context that I'd like to really put focus on my presentation today is that our academia is not fully appreciative of the African personhood. I'll give an example. A lot of times, students in Kenya would say that they needed to attend, for instance, a funeral, but at the same time, while they had a family member whose funeral they needed to attend, they probably also needed to do some meetings or some work in school. And so you find that in African setting, it's not just a civic obligation, but it is also a moral obligation to actually be present in a lot of the African, or cultural or family events. And so that was one major conflict where a lot of times, especially postgraduate students, as we know all over the world, just the same in Africa, could not get enough time, to complete their studies and to juggle all these different roles. And so we found that the peer-to-peer mentorship model was a game changer. This is in contrast to what students are currently faced with in a very rigid, hierarchical academic system, whereby you have a research supervisor assigned to a student most of the time. In only a few universities do students have a leeway to choose, but they are usually assigned matched according to maybe research specialization. But the nature and the flavor and the context of that relationship is more hierarchical, it's more vertical, it's more like boss to junior. And so we also found that a lot of the participants in the Study Smart program actually had a hard time transitioning in owning their voice and, really moving from a more vertical to a more horizontal type of a relationship. And so the other thing that has really been a success from that pilot 1-year program, the Study Smart program, was that we reached over 1,000 researchers with this recorded material on Zoom, which is actually available in the AIDA Africa channels. And we were able to actually intervene for even some serious situations. I think in several cases, some students were really hard pressed with the challenges of not being able to access their research supervisors in their university settings. We had to deal with a few suicidal cases, which was quite unfortunate. But fortunately, we were actually able to convince our fellow scholars, to stay alive. So that ended really, really well. Then we definitely reinvented, the use of platforms such as WhatsApp, which is freely available for a lot of scholars in the East African setting. There is actually a blog post article about the WhatsApp platform and how we revolutionized it to accessing research mentorship programs. And so the use of technology points to an Afrofuturism in academic mental health and well-being, in that we now can cross the barriers of levels of study, institutional, barriers. We can even cross any barriers such as, the different years of experience. And we've even had an exciting time of reverse mentorship where younger scholars are actually mentoring the older scholars on the use of technology. You know, we've all had a steep learning curve in things like using Zoom, and some of us have had to learn where to press to mute and unmute. And that has been a quite interesting phenomenon in the use of technology to actually come together despite our backgrounds. And so this context of East Africa, I believe, shares many similarities with the context of students everywhere. But I think what's really, really special is that you cannot quite remove the student from any of the other roles that they are doing. So, you know, one time we thought of an idea to request any students who would like to be at a certain place, a physical space to do a residency. And, you know, we thought that, oh, if we have students at an exclusive location away from their families, then they might be able to complete their postgraduate studies. But what we actually found was that the opposite was true. A lot of students needed to be on phone, you know, finding out about what's going on with their family. And this is what I'm talking about, the African personhood. And I can summarize it using the Ubuntu philosophy. In Swahili, it's called the Utu philosophy. So I'll prefer to use Utu because I speak Swahili. So the Utu philosophy is all about humanity, being humane. And I've been advocating for kindness in the research journey at all levels and both institutionally and individually. So the Ubuntu or the Utu philosophy is about I am because you are. So a person is a person through other people. I may be fast alone, but we are further together. So by coming together and really cooperating on any and all research questions, we found that we can commiserate and laugh and learn together. Actually, towards the end of the Study Smart program that ended in June 2020 is when I actually did a TED Talk. And to be able to find humor in everything it was quite a privilege for me right in the middle of, you know, the pandemic in Kenya. And so on the issue of, you know, really creating Afrocentric programs, we know that around the world, Africa contributes the least in terms of numbers of publications. And so there is still need for bigger and better radical Afrocentric educational reforms that really centers the human being. Currently, our systems are not student-centered. And even if you look at the policies, say in Kenya, that oversees university called the Commission for University Education, all the policies are at institutional level, and they may be seen to be more protectionist of the institutions. We need to really move to a student-centered focus and really find out if students or early career researchers are grasping, you know, research concepts. Many students are coming in thinking research is really difficult, and that actually is one of the challenges I'll be talking about later. So back to well-being and mental health, there is a place of self-care. As a psychologist, I am quite versed in the individual tips, and I'm sure the next speaker will be talking at length about this, so I'll not dwell on this. So as an individual, as an individual student facing hardships within academia, it would be good to know that as well, there is a continuum of functioning. And if any of us is even in this meeting today and you're really having a hard time coping with a lot of challenges during your academic journey, I hope that this webinar will be comforting to you. So, you know, if you're comfortable in the space, then that means that you're healthy, and that's a good thing, because then you can be an ambassador after this forum and actually support fellow students and researchers who may be struggling. But if you really have so if you really have persistent, you know, distress in your academic journey, it would be good to consider professional care. And that would be a psychologist, a counselor, psychotherapist, or any other mental health practitioner. So I'm not sure why my screen froze. So I'm just going to stop share and then I'll share again. Let's see. Maybe it will work now. Okay, something is happening. Let me see if I can get it here. All right, so as I said earlier, mental health and well-being is in a continuum, and you might be able to see that towards the far right, you could be excelling, and that's okay. You're able to actually perform, and you can separate yourself as a person from your performance. You know, you're comfortable, you're fully in your potential, but to the far left, you might also be in crisis. And so you really want today to do a self-evaluation. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you some things that you do to cope. Maybe you type in the chat. And so holistic and optimal well-being, we can use the 8-factor model that's very well known. And you can look at all these different areas and ask yourself how well you're doing. You know, your emotional, financial, social, spiritual, occupational, physical, intellectual, and environmental. So think about them as buckets. And it would be nice to consistently reevaluate how you are doing holistically. So just this minute, I'd like you to please type in the chat, do you feel like you're in overall balance in these areas? And you can add a few more as you deem fit, these areas of your life as an individual, and you know, what might get in the way for you to develop your own holistic self-care. And if you're planning your self-care strategies under each of these areas, what negative strategies do you need to avoid? And if you implement your plan, how might you feel? So I'd like us to take a minute to just reflect on that. And I could also share mine. So I'll just give you a few minutes to type in the chat. So how are you doing in your different self-care sectors as an individual? So this is just an individual reflection. Only type in the chat if you're okay to do so. Tabitha, do we have any chats yet? I'll just take a couple. Okay, so I'm just checking the chat to see if anybody has any self-reflection yet. I see some chats already. So, Gayani Gamaj says, I don't know if I butchered the spelling of your name. I always try to plan. These days, I even put my tea and lunch times into schedules, as working from home has made it difficult to move away. I really like that. And I know Petra will be speaking more about, you know, the recent COVID-19 transitions, which include, you know, working from home. That's a real challenge. I like the idea of scheduling breaks. That's really well done. Thank you for that. And then I see Shazma Mukri saying, I am only able to do self-care if I am mindful about it or intentional. Otherwise, I always feel like I don't have time. I really love that. And thanks, Shazma, for joining from Kenya. Really well said. All right, so I think I'll proceed in the interest of time. You could go back to these slides and really do your own self-evaluation on what you need to do. But I'm going to tell you what negative strategies I had to avoid throughout my journey. My doctorate journey was 3.5 years minimum or 5 years maximum program, but I actually completed it in 8 years. And one negative habit I really had to fight off is procrastination. So I'd say that I'll do it tomorrow, I'll do it the next minute, and I'd never get a lot of things done. So you also have to go to work on the barriers that, you know, are internal, that you are likely to procrastinate, for instance, and delay doing what you need to do. And therefore, that's actually one negative strategy you may need to avoid. So that's just an example so you can think about your own self-care. My screen keeps freezing, so I'll just reshare. All right, so some challenges so far from the early career researchers in East Africa is that our academic system has been too exam focused. And, you know, a lot of students will be full in the libraries, you know, with longer hours, they're cramming, they're so stressed, fast approaching deadlines. And so many of them fall into burnout, and unfortunately also getting into unethical practices such as paying somebody to do your work for you, which has become quite a menace in our setting. Another challenge has been, you know, personal and professional life. Especially for women, this becomes a real challenge because most women who are postgraduate researchers are in several caregiving roles. They're in what we call the sandwich generation. So they might be having their parents to take care of and maybe also young ones to take care of. And all of this balancing is happening with minimal support. I mean, many students know that there's now a counseling center in every campus, but rarely will students connect, you know, that they are having this challenge in their academic journey with actually going in for counseling sessions during their academic progress. So another struggle is lifestyle changes, you know, amidst daily stress. I've had a lot of postgraduate students, you know, telling me about cancer, diabetes, you know, even just transitioning, moving from one location to another, just a lot of lifestyle changes. And unfortunately, again, for women, domestic violence really goes up, and there's a big risk there because, again, a lot of women's roles in societies are defined along with, you know, caregiving tasks. And so when you've added an academic program on top of an already full schedule for especially a woman inside the home, working from home is a big challenge. And for those who may not have supportive partners, they really struggle with that. And of course, the perception of research as difficult in itself. Research is a rigorous process, but some people, because we mostly in East Africa have not had grounding, you know, in just basic research skills. So coming into, you know, the academic program, people give up. Most people will start to give up before they even try. So that's a challenge. And you could as well discuss in the chat if you've come across any other challenges. And some solutions, you know, make time for your favorite people. I always just blocked out all my family birthdays because we do the birthday thing in our family. And, you know, that's a good thing, just to keep your sanity. Take a break, look at something else, you know, plan something you can look forward to, such as a vacation, a holiday, you know, challenge yourself physically. It's really nice to take a mental break. And when you're on a brain break, do something that has a different feel, you know, than just a mental exertion. And then, of course, doing nothing from time to time, just, you know, being able to really shut off and refresh. And if you are into mindfulness or meditation, those things can happen. And there's something that also came up from our well-being and mental health programs. A lot of people complaining about eye strain. I think it's because a lot of us are now working online, and some of the online work replaced physical work, especially during our research journeys post-COVID. And so you could practice the 20-20-20 method. You look at least 20 feet away for 20 seconds, every 20 minutes. As you know, our brain and our eyes are not used to focusing in a small area. So that would be a good tip, just in case you find your eyes getting tired. Even during this webinar, you could do that. for just 20 seconds and then come right back. So that's all I have to say for now. There's my email and my WhatsApp number in case you'd like to contact me. Thank you very much, and I'll be here for questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Wangari, for that excellent presentation. You actually looked at the well-being in a holistic way. You brought in your experiences. You shared that with us. Those challenges, experiences are actually common to all early career researchers in the world. I'm sure there are many questions. We'll entertain them at the end of the session. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Petra Boynton from UK. She's an agony aunt and social psychologist working in international healthcare research. Petra is a consultant for universities, charities, and other organizations to ensure research is safe, effective, and ethical. And also mental health is prioritized. She has recently published a self-help book for anyone working or studying in academia. The book is called Being Well in Academia. Quite relevant to us. And the full topic is Being Well in Academia, ways to feel stronger, safer, and more connected. So I'm sure we'll have a very, very relatable talk from Petra, and she's going to talk to us on managing your well-being in pandemics in relation to current situation. Over to you, Petra.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can all hear me okay.
Yes.
Good. That was such a lovely talk. I was sort of nodding my way through Dr. Wangari's talk the whole time, and in fact there was lots of similarities, so I will skip over things I was going to say that have already been covered, because it was just really lovely to hear it all explained so clearly. And it's brilliant to have so many of you here today. I think we're probably all here because we're interested in well-being, or perhaps concerned about our own well-being. And I think, following on from what we've already learned in the previous talk, this idea of noticing we might have been struggling individually, and often we can feel very alone, but collectively we are much stronger. And so I think noting that and feeling stronger together is a really useful skill that we can all carry forward after this session today. So I thought it would be helpful if I talk a little bit about some of the issues that the pandemic has raised specifically for academics, and about our well-being there. And then we'll sort of talk about maybe either questions you have of dilemmas or problems you're facing currently, or solutions that you've got. It may well be you're already working on programs that you'd like us to know about. Now, something that comes as a bit of a shock, I think, is that for those of us who are working or studying in a university, this is the actual third academic year that's affected by COVID-19. I know it feels like it's been going on forever, but when you put it in those terms, it really brings home to us that this is actually a long-term issue that's going on now. It's going to be continuing for the foreseeable future, and it's going to make a difference to us for many years to come, and not just to us, but to our families and our loved ones and everybody else that we care about. So it's led to lots of rapid shifts to online learning, studying through lockdowns. Some of you may have experienced lockdowns and isolation, learning in face-to-face conditions, but perhaps with masks. There's all sorts of things that have happened. Some of us are in countries where vaccination programs are happening, and some of us are not. And all of that's making a difference to our well-being and our safety and our feeling of safety within the community, but also student safety, whether that's on or off campus. So all of that has presented challenges to a greater or lesser extent to us. And we also heard previously about how some of those things have really impacted on us within the home, as well as within our spaces of study. Now, some of us have actually benefited. I know there's not many positives in the pandemic, but some of us have benefited from the move to online. This is a good example. I think before the pandemic, a lot of us were struggling to join in with events and activities because of cost or travel, or if we had other responsibilities or we were carers, the fact that we couldn't just leave for several days on end for traveling just to go to a half-day conference and then go home again. Nowadays, we can sort of patch in, we can zoom in, and we can be connected. And we also heard previously of different projects that people have started using to help in that regard. And this has actually been a worry, I think, for some students or some academics, in that if we are now moving back towards on-campus learning or face-to-face practices, that produces a worry not just of whether I might be at risk of catching COVID, but also the idea that these benefits I've had of connectivity and companionship might now be lost. And that's been particularly concerning, I think, for disabled students and staff, but also anybody who's traditionally been left out from academic practices. And lots of people in the Global South, I think, have been recognising that they have been thoroughly excluded before now, have had some benefits, not complete, but some during the pandemic that may again be lost. So I think we need to really do our best to hold on to the good things that we've learned. We also know the pandemic has increased a lot of toxic things that were already there in academia. So things like competitiveness, precarity, worries about jobs, this pressure to publish, this endless pressure to be doing fantastic and groundbreaking research, the idea that you can never take a break. And I think PhDs and early career researchers certainly will relate to that sort of feeling that you're not allowed any time off ever. All of those sort of feelings and worries were there before the pandemic, but have certainly been heightened alongside. And we're seeing bigger gaps too, in terms of people who have always done well in academic spaces continue to do well and pull ahead, and those who've been disadvantaged to fall behind. Things around ableism, sexism, racism, homo, bi and transphobia have always been there in academia, but they've continued and they've caused harm. And they may be a particular issue if your university doesn't have capacity to deal with them, or in some ways colludes with them. So it depends where you're living. It may be the state or the country actually makes you vulnerable. And that is very difficult when we're trying to suggest ways to seek help, because when you're already feeling very vulnerable and at risk, opening up and saying I need help for various reasons might actually make you more vulnerable still. There's also been lots of issues around world events, not just the pandemic, but political upheaval, political unrest, north-south inequalities and climate change, to name a few, that we're either directly affected by or we're aware of because of sort of rolling news that can make us feel very unsettled and very concerned that, you know, it's like, well, what next? And I think for the last decade, but certainly the last 5 years, there's been sort of repeated dramatic events happening all over the world at a local and national and international level that can leave us feeling utterly exhausted and drained. So I think one practical tip is that you don't have to watch the news all the time. Sometimes you will need to for safety reasons, but actually just switching off from the world outside, and that includes social media, I know that's a real challenge, can actually sometimes make you feel better. Now, in terms of universities, some have dealt with the pandemic well. Some have had good schemes around supporting staff, and they've thought about sort of ways to make people work more flexibly. They've been aware of kind of discrepancies and inequalities. However, I think the vast majority of universities have not handled things well. And so it's been left to individuals to set up their own programs, their own ventures, their own ways of helping one another. We've also found that the suggestions for care that we've seen, and it's why I really enjoyed our previous talk of giving us lots of opportunities and ideas that are Afrocentric, that it's a different way, sometimes only subtly different, but it's a different way of looking at how we might conceptualize care and how we might offer care, and particularly centering people at the beginning and communities at the middle. A lot of the care advice that you'll see provided by universities, if it's provided, is very much a westernized individualistic model where somebody from outside, possibly a therapist, will give you a solution that you yourself are not empowered to find solutions or ways of working, and that you would not be working collectively with community and those you love or those you rely upon or those you're responsible for in other ways. And I think you see this more acutely on social media, particularly when you have discussions about academic well-being on hashtags on say Twitter or Instagram particularly, where people will often talk about all their problems, but it's very much coming from a young funded American STEM perspective. And it's not to say that students in America studying STEM subjects for PhDs aren't finding life difficult, but their experiences are not necessarily universal, and also the solutions offered for them are not necessarily appropriate either for them or for the rest of us. So something I think that we can all be encouraged by is looking for a more varied form of evidence around what might work to help us as we continue through the pandemic, and also as we keep our focus on the problems that exist within universities around exploitation, around the lack of proper training, around, you know, the skills that you would expect as a researcher to be given are not there. A lot of times, if those things are met, people's mental health tends to improve. A lot of the issues I found, certainly during the pandemic, is that people are struggling because the basic things they should have been taught have not been provided. So I think that we've also, you know, got this idea that with online learning particularly, there's a lot of digital surveillance. So there's quite a lot of people feeling that they've got to be digitally present. And that can be a good thing in terms of you're connected with loved ones, but it can also be negative if you feel that you are always being checked up upon, that it's noticed if you're not working very long hours, that in the absence of, say, for example, being in a laboratory all the time to study, you're now supposed to be virtually present. That can be exhausting, and especially if you've got issues with bandwidth, with connectivity, with family, with people around you, with privacy, and all of those other issues that I think a lot of us would relate to over the past couple of years. So I think if we take all that into account, and I feel like I've brought the tone down really, and the previous talk was very uplifting and has a lot of positives. So I think if you're watching this back, you probably want to rewind at this point and get a dose of happiness before you come back to this part, because I've sort of outlined more of the negative, and it would be good, I think, in our discussion later that we return to perhaps positive factors or things that we feel we can do to make us feel stronger. But I wanted to go back and look at some of the ways you might be coping, and we already saw this previously in some of the slides Dr. Wangari shared, where we looked at the sort of progress from health to unhealth, or mental wellness to mental illness, where you might fall along the line. So I thought I'd give you some symptoms or some things you might react to during the last few years, or maybe before, and you can sort of indicate, maybe you want to say in the chat if these things relate to you. Oh, sorry, the cat has just turned up in time. This is Melody. And those of you who are familiar with Author Aid might have seen her before. She's got away again, so that's as much use she was as a therapy cat today. But if you want to join in this next part and say which symptoms you relate to, or which things have happened to you, if you feel comfortable doing so, it might help the rest of us. So I think a big symptom is grief and loss, and that might be the loss of a loved one and somebody you care about. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, Petra. Yes, go on.
I just got a message to say recording has stopped, so I shall carry on.
Oh, yes, don't worry.
Okay, so it's that I think we've got this idea of grief and loss, that a lot of us feel like we've lost a loved one, or we have lost a loved one, or we feel like we've lost opportunities, that things that we hope would happen have not happened. Perhaps we've had to give up on a particular area of study or drop out of a course. Something has happened that we feel that we've been left behind. A lot of us might feel listless, that you can't concentrate. Some people refer to it as like a brain fog, that you had a thought there and it's gone. Anyone who's experienced menopause or is going through menopause at the moment will also recognize this as a daily tedious symptom as well. But this whole idea of feeling unable to concentrate, and that there's too many thoughts in your head and they're very slippery, is something that I think has increased. And we've heard words like Zoom fatigue that comes up when we're having endless meetings, but just I think constantly being present and online will do that as well. Some of you might have noticed that you don't have any motivation. You're very bored. I think a lot of us feel guilty admitting during a pandemic that we feel bored, and we probably saw throughout the time, but certainly when we first started going into the pandemic, that people were posting how they were going to learn a new language or take up baking or have a new skill, and some of them were even sharing their fantastic artistic creations. But if you're anything like me, I have managed nothing during it, and I have felt really bored at times. There's been endless things I could do, but I don't have the energy to do them. So I think a lot of us feel that. We may have experienced changes in the way that we sleep. Our sleeping patterns are disrupted. We might feel very exhausted, but yet we can't sleep. We might change the way that we eat, that we might want to not eat at all, or we're skipping meals, or perhaps we're eating more than we used to, and that might be worrying us. It might not. We might not be nourishing ourselves with food as we used to. It might just become kind of a thing you grab in between a meeting, and so it's not something that's shared anymore. A lot of people, I think, as we heard in the last talk, feel very lonely. And I think loneliness can be either working from home, or that if you have been in a place of work but not many people are there, you can feel lonely there. And you might also have lots of people in your home. You might all be locked down together, but you still feel lonely because you're separated from your peers and your colleagues at work or your studies. Some people talk about avoiding other people. So actually, the more we've been isolated, the more you don't want to chat, that maybe now you could meet up again in person. You're anxious about doing that, or perhaps you feel like you never really enjoyed that much, and perhaps the pandemic gave you an opportunity to enjoy being isolated, and now you feel like you have to go back. But some people also feel like they're avoiding lots of interactions, particularly with supervisors or with colleagues, and particularly if you're behind on work, that you don't want to say, actually, I haven't done this, and I feel very, very worried about that. We also have a thing around apprehension and dread, and that can go hand in hand with the fact that lots of bad things seem to still happen, which is why, again, I suggested turning off the news. Fearing the future, that could be about world events, your local community, your own family, or the progress of your studies. Lots of people talk at the moment at any point in even doing research or being in academia. What does the future hold? Are there going to be any jobs? All of those things are worries I think we can share too. Some people talk about feeling tearful, that you just start crying for no reason. You might feel very angry, very frustrated, very cynical, that you don't have as much sympathy for others as perhaps you used to have. If you have health conditions, be they mental or physical, they may have worsened. Or you might feel very numb and disconnected. We heard earlier about procrastination. Lots of us, I think, have struggled with that. And also, I think, imposter syndrome, that you doubt yourself, or you feel that you don't belong. And I think it's fair to say, actually, a lot of us, and particularly those who've always been marginalised in academia, and especially if you're located in the global south, talk about imposter syndrome. But I think we can challenge that and say sometimes it's not imposter syndrome. It's not that you don't deserve to be there, or it's that you feel that you aren't welcome there. It's that you are actively not welcome to spaces, that it's difficult to publish, that it's difficult to get to conferences, it's difficult to be invited as a speaker. And I think we are becoming aware of those issues, but I think we're also still paying a lot of lip service to it and not doing enough about it. So I think if you feel like you are missing out, it's not necessarily imaginary, it might be deliberate, and that itself is painful to cope with. A lot of people talk about feeling like a failure because they can't do what they want to do, or feeling trapped by their emotions and their feelings. Maybe it's also you feel like you just don't enjoy life as you used to, and that's because life has changed, or actually things are okay. We have an expression here that I've acquired from my teenagers, which is you just feel a bit meh. And it's just that you can't put your finger on why you feel rubbish. You just don't feel like yourself anymore. And I think all of those things can make you feel very helpless. And as we heard previously, for some people that can be as serious as considering suicide or feeling suicidal. And I think if that is the case with you, we're going to put some resources in at the end where you can seek help should you need to. So I think in all this, there's also a sense of guilt that quite often we feel, but I'm doing a PhD, or I'm an early career scientist, or I've just got my doctorate, or I'm established in academia, or I've got a grant, or I'm enjoying my research, but I still am not happy, or I see other people around me really struggling, or that I'm lucky that I'm in a university and my neighbours are struggling with poverty. You know, it might even be that your family is expecting you to earn for them at the same time. All of that can leave you feeling very, very conflicted and guilty. So we could chat about that as well. But I would say if you take an inventory of all the things that have happened to you directly or indirectly in the last year, it would be surprising if you didn't feel some of these things. And it doesn't mean to say that you're experiencing burnout or you've got a mental health condition, although it could be. And I think, as you've been already advised, if that's the case, professional help is the route to go down if it's available, and if it's not, we can talk about that in a minute. But I think it's reasonable to react strongly to huge changes in your world, and huge unpredictable changes in your world as well. So I think the other thing that we could think about is really, I suppose, what have been trying to do to address these issues. And I was going to outline some of the things that universities have tried, which may be things you've already benefited from, and if not, these might be things you might want to try yourself. And if that's the case and you'd like some help with that, then I'm sure all of us here today can help you. We already heard about the friendship benches, which are a wonderful idea and I think are being adapted in different places in the world. There's also something called frazzle cafes or tired cafes, where if you're feeling completely exhausted, you can gather for a drink and a chat, either virtually or in person. People might have retreats where they go away and gather together, and that might be again virtual or in person. There's a thing called mental health first aid or psychological first aid, which is sort of basic first aid skills but for your brain that you can use to help comfort colleagues around you, and those are quite useful. Mental health first aid you tend to have to pay for to learn to study, but psychological first aid, I've got some resources we'll be sharing at the end, which is free and you can learn it, and it's a culturally adaptable thing that you can use in crisis, and that includes a pandemic, to help people help themselves cope. We've seen wellbeing events, so wellbeing days and activities or weeks, mental health weeks. Some people have found them really helpful and signposted them to other sources of care. Some people have felt that they are inadequate in the circumstances. And the same goes for online support, so webinars, sharing videos, things like that. Lots of people have found that really useful. Other people have felt it's inadequate because it's not changing the structure of university. So structures where you feel poorly treated or exploited or not supported doesn't get changed if you're sent a wellness webinar. The tricky thing though, I think, is that a lot of that discourse tends to come from cultures where there is an expectation that paid for therapy can be an answer. And I think in countries and communities where often there is nothing else available and you are going to have to find solutions yourself or look to other places for it, that actually there does need to be something. And even if it's a small thing, like watching a video that makes you feel better, or going for a walk, or sitting outside in the sunshine, or whatever it is you do, if that has helped you, I don't think we should dismiss anything as long as it's not actually actively causing harm. So, you know, something that tells you to not take your medication is causing harm, but something that says, you know, listen to a piece of music is not hurting you, as long as it's not expecting that to change everything dramatically. Counselling is an option, peer-to-peer support is an option, mentoring is an option, and I think we heard about that and reverse mentoring previously. But there's some other things that you can do, so taking some time off and resting, focusing on the positives, that's things or people you love. It can be something just very small or something big, like planning a holiday or just watching your favourite TV show. Setting boundaries is important. Saying no, I know we often struggle with that, but saying no can be a good idea. And saying no clearly and without guilt, even better. Looking at a better work-life study balance, and I know that's very challenging, and again we could talk about that in a little bit, how we actually do that. If there is training available, seek it and accept it. I think a lot of us feel that it's a sign of weakness if we say I can't do this, but as researchers we can never do this alone. We have to learn with other people. If you're experiencing problems, get backup, get your colleagues to help you. If you have a union that's available, join that. Join online networks. There's lots of them out there that, you know, Author Aid is just one where you can get connectivity and support. Gather evidence. That might be symptoms that you list, that you talk to your doctor about, or if you're being bullied, that you note down when those incidents happen. So again, you could try and report it. Recognise your strengths, write it down, stick it up somewhere. When something goes well, praise yourself. You know, if you're not in work to have someone praise you, do your own praise ceremony and say how well you did. And, you know, whether that's just celebrating with a cup of tea or a nice meal, or whether it's actually sitting together with your family and saying I did brilliantly today. Delegate. Other people can take on tasks. You don't have to do everything. And again, in a research project, delegation should be the norm. Distractions are good, as long as they don't tap into procrastination. So your hobbies, exercise, dance, playing an instrument, listening to music, baking, whatever it is you like doing. And it could be something you share virtually if you can't connect together. Watching TV shows across the world with colleagues, something like that can be fun. And there's lots of ways I think we can find friendship in online spaces that we heard previously that might be something we've previously forgotten. I mentioned already, switch off social media, not all the time because I know we're all glued to it, but to give yourself a break, and particularly if it's negative. I've got a phrase of imposing a tweet tax, which is if you're looking at negative things or sharing negative things, you have to share 3 positives for every 1 negative. And that might be something that helps you too. I think nourishing and caring for yourself, and that's particularly true if your role is the carer for others, that you would maybe think about, how do you care for your loved ones? How do you look after your best friend? What would a best friend need if they were in your shoes? And then if you can think about what you would offer them, can you give yourself the same care? We've also heard about calming and meditation techniques, relaxing. They don't work for everyone. Some people find them actually quite unpleasant, but if they do work for you, they're worth a try. And I think that kind of brings me to the end of my list. I'd like to stop now so we can focus on you and your questions and solutions and suggestions. But again, thank you ever so much for having me here today, and I hope you found this useful.
Thank you so much, Petra. Thank you for giving an overview and also very comprehensive coverage of what we all would have gone through and still going through during this pandemic. The psychological changes in academia. We live with challenges, deadlines, plans, goals, targets, and then this pandemic came. And people are going through it in different ways, in their own ways, so that there can be problems as Petra classified, and then there are solutions also. I think Petra listed some of the solutions. We don't have questions on chat yet, but if anyone wants to ask a question, you can unmute and ask a question. And I think we discussed about imposter syndrome and also some of the common symptoms that we may go through. And I think the best take-home message is to be your own best friend and look after yourself also while you look after the others. And Petra, I think we discussed about psychological immunity also. We always discuss in relation to COVID-19, we discuss about psychological, we discuss about physical immunity against infections. I think Joyce and also Petra indicated ways that we can develop our psychological immunity, how to stay strong. So any comments on from both of you in relation to being immune to what is going on around us?
Yeah, maybe I can chime in, and I really enjoyed the presentation by Petra. I would say that we cannot predict the future. And while our academic journeys have been almost, they've been literally turned upside down, it would really, really be useful to stay balanced and stay connected. We might be able to, deal with stress better if we can implement some of these well-being tactics. So all these things that we mentioned will give us that kind of psychological immunity.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Pangari. Petra, any comments from you?
I forgot to unmute myself there for a second. I think really just to echo what's already being shared, and I think I found actually asking other people what they found helpful really being useful, because you can get very trapped in your own sort of set of solutions and your own habits, and they then stop working. And I mean, people have come up with all sorts of ideas that I wouldn't have thought about. So I think that it's not quite the same as sort of creating an immunity, but it will give you different suggestions to try if you feel like you've exhausted everything and nothing is working anymore.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes, I think you answered the question well. I think Gayani Gamage wants to talk a little bit more about procrastination. And she likes to hear some things which can work for us in academia. Any comments on that, Pangari, Petra?
I just typed in the chat about that because it's something I've struggled with a lot. So with the blessing of technology, you could use virtual groups where you write together, such as, you know, at Ada Africa Journal Club, we have a program called Shut Up and Write. It actually started in California, USA, but it's now global. And you could literally just agree to start and stop at a certain time and just get to work so that you maintain the integrity of your program and don't slip into procrastination. The other thing is accountability buddies. I have had several along the way. I see some of my accountability buddies on this call, and you literally get a scholar to walk with you and just you know, organize calls on how are you doing and what do you need to do to get over procrastination. So I'd say, again, although your research is yours and most of us will graduate, you know, most likely individually, we can use these resources such as this Zoom meeting to really come together and get to work and actually make our time productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Wangari. Petra, any comments from you?
Yeah, I think, well, those two are brilliant suggestions. I was going to say them, so I've now had to think of something else I was going to say. I think the other thing is building in breaks, which often sounds counterproductive, because when you're thinking about, you know, if you're procrastinating, you're thinking I'm not doing enough. So if I say building breaks, it's like, oh no, that doesn't make sense. But actually, if you know you've got scheduled breaks, and I think breaks where you're going to do something totally different and that you enjoy, you can almost start using the breaks as a reward system. So it's like, well, I'm going to write for an hour, I'm going to read for an hour, or I'm going to make sure I do this session, and then I will stop and I will listen to the radio, or I'm going to make myself some lunch, or I'm going to phone a friend, or I'm going to scroll through Instagram, or whatever it is that I like to do, or maybe I'm going to go for a walk later. You know, that you build in things that are very different. So I think that if you've got those in, it also lets you notice, I think, if procrastination isn't actually procrastination, but is actually exhaustion. And I think sometimes you actually, again, it's counterintuitive, but if you find yourself doing lots of procrastination, it's because you are too tired. And short deadlines, that works for me. So if I've got a very long deadline, I will procrastinate because I feel like I've got forever. And then it's 2 days beforehand and I'm running around trying to fix it. Whereas if I break that down into shorter deadlines, so I need to do this. And some people find using kind of actual management tools, sort of time management tools, help them with that, or working with someone who does. So on a recent project, I worked with somebody who's got really, really good project management skills. And I couldn't procrastinate there because I was tasked to actually get my work done. So it's a sort of another way of saying accountability buddy.
Thank you so much, Petra. I think, yes, you both covered another thing that we can do, that we do in our writing clubs also in Colombo. As Wangari said, we have mentors, senior mentors giving targets. And also when you plan, if you can break down your target rather than thinking, okay, I'm going to finish writing up my thesis, or I'm going to finish my full proposal, you can break it down and have, you know, easily accessible targets. Then you feel, okay, I have achieved that. And then thinking about the big picture and trying to postpone, thinking that I will not be able to achieve it. If you break it down and achieve small steps, then you'll also feel happy, as Petra said, and you can reward yourself while you're going along the pathway. There's another question, I think, from Benjamin. What he says, it is quite difficult coping with academics while you're looking for funding. That's true. Also getting unsuccessful with grant applications, you can have disappointments. So how does a person keep on track with research, especially during virtual era? I think that's a very good question. Wangari, would you like to answer, Petra?
Yes, I actually was trying to type in the chat because I know we are past time. But yeah, that's a very good question. And it's a great idea for students to pre-plan as early as possible, maybe prior to joining a program. But funding challenges are a major issue in the system, especially for early career researchers in the Global South. In the Global North, research is quite robust and it's well funded. So this systemic challenge needs to be addressed because it's highly competitive. Only a few get the privilege of funding, and funding could be a real barrier to completing one's studies. So I think it's both individual and a systemic challenge, but mostly systemic.
Petra?
Yeah, I think this has been an issue the world over, and I think that there's growing evidence that the divide in terms of who's getting funding has got worse during the pandemic, and rather than you'd like to hope it has improved, but it hasn't. So I think that's no comfort, but I think it does actually at least explain the fact that lots and lots of people are finding it really, really difficult to get funding at the moment, and that pressure to get funding hasn't gone anywhere. I think the previous suggestions are very helpful. I think working with networks is really useful. I think sharing advice around how to actually put applications in, how to apply for funding is important. And I mean, it's very difficult because we've just talked about being exhausted, but I think one of the real issues is you've just got to keep going and going and going at it. So I would say save drafts, look out for opportunities, keep not recycling exactly, but you would reuse things. So don't keep starting from scratch every time. If there's ideas you're going for, keeping trying at it. Looking for smaller grants can sometimes be a good idea, especially if you're an early career researcher, in terms of something that might be a pilot study works well, and then you could look for extra funding. Look to collaborate as well, especially with community, industry, business. That can be another opportunity. And I think things like this, often opportunities and discussions, is where you start networking. A lot of it, again, is you're trying to put these proposals together in very competitive ways, and often very excluding ways that we really already heard. If you've got colleagues to work with you that you trust, that could be another opportunity as well. And it also means when you don't get it, it's not just the burden that's held by you. But I think that the other thing is just say sort of solidarity, really, because it's really, really hard. And I think any ways you can find to try and build confidence in other ways and recognise you are more than your publications and you're more than your grant funding is really important, especially if you're in an institution that's one of those places where it doesn't matter what you do, it's never good enough. That can be really soul destroying.
Yes, thank you, Petra. I hope Benjamin has got the answer for the question. If I'm to add a little bit more, rejections, whether it's your publication, your grant application, those are part and parcel of academia. It's not just you all have got these rejections. Grant applications have been rejected so many times, but you need to actually stay on, hold on. And especially during this era, we need to be more creative. The priorities of funding will change definitely. And because of the pandemic and the economic situation in the whole world. So there'll be more rejections. So don't worry. Just as Petra said, keep at it and work on it. Save your applications. You can use them later. But think innovatively, think creatively, and see where the priorities are and try to focus your applications there. So I think we have gone beyond our allocated time. So thank you so much again, Wangari and Petra, for those excellent presentations. I wish we had more time to discuss and answer some more questions. Hopefully we'll do this another time. So thanks again. Thanks all of you for your active participation and joining with us. I would say ayubowan to all of you. Take care.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add one more thing, which is you can continue your discussions in a Google group for Author Aid. I'm going to post the link in the chat again. If you wanted to talk further about well-being in academia, feel free to do so with your colleagues on the call here. Thank you so much for joining, and have a good rest of the day wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you, too.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you, Wangari.
You're welcome.
Sorry, we had a few technical problems behind the scenes. but I think we've managed to record the sessions and 2 parts of the recording. We're going to put them together and make one recording. But thank you very much for coming. And I missed Melody the cat, Petra, but I'm going to watch back the recording so I can see.
You're muted.
There you go. I was saying, I've got a bag hanging on the chair, and halfway through the meeting, she started scratching it, and I thought, oh goodness, we're going to have an incident. But I don't know where she's gone now. She's
Great, thank you very much. We're gonna couple the recording together, and then we're going to share it later and see if we can get the transcript as well. So yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming today. And
Tabitha, would you be able to just email me the link to the group, that you just shared in chat? I have saved it, but just in case I get any glitches here, because I'm going to shift off to a different computer now. Okay. Would you be able to send me that, and then I'll hop into that later on today? Okay,
cool. Tabitha's gone now, so I'll share that with you.
Okay, thank you.
We'll share that with you. Thank you very much.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm going to stop the session now and stop the recording.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant.